Hello, I'm Jim Turk, the director of the Center for Free Expression, and I would like to I'd like to welcome you to a very special panel that we're having today. A year ago, we had a panel looking at what was happening to Russian journalism and Russian journalists 1 year after, during Putin's crackdown on journalism and the passage of a law that essentially criminalized independent journalism in Russia. We're bringing back that panel today, as I'll explain in a minute, but I want to begin by acknowledging that the territory on which I am speaking to you today is the territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and the Chippewa, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaties signed by multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. I'd like to finally thank our co-sponsors for today's panel, the Canadian Association of Journalists, Canadian Journalists for Free Expression, PEN Canada, and World Press Freedom Canada. As I was saying, a year ago, we had a panel that was part of our series on threats to press freedom. We had looked at the challenges being faced by journalists in Kashmir, in Afghanistan, and then had a third panel that was titled Threats to Press Freedom, Putin's War on Journalists. Our plan today was to bring back the same panel that we had a year ago to look at what's happened in that period since we last talked. Alexei Kovalev, one of the panelists, let us know just a few days ago that for personal reasons, he was not able to be with us today. The other panelists were, and then a few hours ago, Ekaterina Kotrikadze got in touch with us to say that the anchor for her program today, which is going on simultaneously with this event, her media's program, the anchor got sick and she had to fill in for him. So we've done an interview with her. So I'd like to begin by just telling you who she is, and we'll lead off the top with an interview that Julian Scher did with her just a few minutes ago. Ekaterina is the news director and anchor of TV Rain, which was based in Moscow, and it was the last independent television channel in Russia that was forced to shut down at the beginning of March 2022 after Putin's law came into force. Ekaterina had to go into exile, first in Riga, Latvia in July, and then has since, Rain TV has since moved to Amsterdam. Before 2019, Ekaterina was deputy editor-in-chief of RTVI, an independent Russian language broadcasting network based in New York. In 2009, at only 25 years of age, Ekaterina was chosen to lead the Russian language television channel PIK. She's quite an impressive journalist. You'll hear from her shortly. The first of the panelists with us today is Maxim Trudolyubov. He was born in Russia. He has an impressive career as a journalist. He anchored a talk show on the radio station Echo of Moscow. He was an editor and correspondent for the newspaper Capital and a writer and translator for the Moscow Times, which is an English language online newspaper. From 2003 to 2015, he was the editorial page editor of Vedomosti, an independent Russian business daily. He was an editor of In Liberty, editor-in-chief of Russia File, a blog of the Kennan Institute, where he's a senior fellow. And he has been a contributing opinion writer for the International New York Times since the fall of 2013. He won the Paul Klebnikov Fund's Prize for Courageous Russian Journalism in 2007, was the Yale World Fellow in 2009, and a Nieman Fellow at Harvard from 2010 to 2011. Welcome, Maxim. Our second panel.
Hi. Thanks for this generous introduction.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you with us. The second panelist is Chris Brown. Chris is a well-known foreign correspondent with CBC News, having served as a CBC foreign correspondent in Moscow from 2017 to 2021. He traveled in Russia extensively, from the Arctic to the Caspian Sea, from the Baltic enclave of Kaliningrad to the far eastern city of Vladivostok. He's covered conflicts in Afghanistan and Syria, and it was on site in Indonesia and Japan in the aftermath of the 2001 and 2011 tsunamis. He's been tear gassed in Hong Kong, traveled to the Islamic State bastions in central Syria, and filed from inside Chernobyl's red zone. He's winner of multiple awards for his journalism. He began his career as a radio reporter in Halifax and Fredericton, and also previously was based in Victoria. Most recently, he has made many trips in this past year to Ukraine, covering the Russian war, and most recently covering what's going on in Sudan. Welcome, Chris. It's an honor to have you with us.
No, it's very good. It's very good to be on a panel with Maxim too. I'm a big fan of his work.
And the moderator for this group is another outstanding journalist, Julian Scher. Julian is a veteran TV documentary writer and director, as well as an accomplished newsroom trainer and the author of 7 books. He's been an investigative journalist for Canada's 2 leading newspapers, the Toronto Star and the Globe and Mail. His film Ghosts of Afghanistan won the top Canadian Screen Award prize for Best Documentary. He was also the senior producer of CBC's The Fifth Estate, which is Canada's premier investigative TV program. He did that for 5 years. And over his career, he has won 7 Screen Awards, Canada's equivalent to the Emmys. Julian has trained journalists around the world, from Kosovo to Syria to Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. And he's about to leave on another training journey that'll take him to Turkey, Lebanon, Morocco, and Europe. Julian is also a senior fellow with the Center for Free Expression and is also active with Journalists for Human Rights. Welcome, Julian.
Thanks, Jim. And it's great to be here with such a distinguished panel. 2 people that I know well, Chris and Maxim. As Jim explained, Ekaterina is working every day for RAIN TV, trying to get the truth about the war to Russia. She was busy, as we're about to speak, but one of the questions that Ekaterina and everybody is focusing on right now is the arrest of Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich. Ekaterina talked about seeing him quite recently when he came to Riga. And then as he left, feeling, she told me, almost jealous because he was able to go back to Russia, her beloved country, right? And she felt a bit of jealousy for the foreign correspondents and their relative freedom compared to her and other Russian journalists. But of course, his arrest changed all of that. Chris, you talked last time when we met a year ago about, the challenges, but also, the pleasures of being a foreign correspondent in Moscow. What does Evan's arrest mean, and how much have things changed for foreign correspondents from the time you were there?
Well, just look at what we saw yesterday in that Moscow courthouse. It's a courthouse I've been in many times. You wait in the courtroom. It's relatively straightforward to get in, and then they lead the prisoner, because there is no presumption of innocence in Russia in these cases. They lead the prisoner into a cage. They put them in a cage with bars on them, and this doesn't really matter whether you're a journalist or an accused spy or whatever the case is. And it's quite a shocking thing to see from the outside. That's not how we obviously treat people in North America who are accused of a crime, or in Europe. And what struck me about seeing Evan there was, he's been in there for 2 or 3 weeks now. He can't have been having a very easy time. Mentally, it must be crushing. And yet you see this young man who came in, he smiled, he stood there, in my opinion, fairly defiantly. He had his hands in his pockets, and this did not look like someone who, at least on the outside, was intimidated. So my sense right away was this was, someone who was projecting confidence. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm here. I'm going to defend myself. And I can tell you, not everyone who's in that position would do that. It's a very intimidating thing to be in a Russian courtroom at all. And Evan would have been on the other side many times. I know, doing stories about the people in this cage. So that was a very, for me, almost a moving moment to see that, because,
Right.
I left Russia about 6 months before the war began. I can tell you, I've been interrogated by the FSB and the back of Buhanka little trucks and so forth. It's not a pleasant experience to be questioned by Russian authorities. You don't know what's going to happen, and they try to obviously put you off your game. So he's obviously been under an immense amount of pressure. So just to directly answer your question, it's obviously not been safe for foreign journalists of any kind to be there. They kicked out our CBC bureau not long after the war began. And I mean, they revoked the visas of everybody. They terminated our bank accounts. And about 6 months ago, they personally put me on the sanctions list as well. So the message is, we don't want you, don't come back, stay away. And it took a lot of very brave people to kind of, look at those developments and say, we're still going to report. And there still are a handful of people, but it's a tough one. With anyone with a family, anyone who could have had leverage applied to them, I think probably left much earlier. So he's a brave guy.
Maxim, what are you hearing from your friends and colleagues in Russia about the mood and the message that Evan Gershowicz's arrest sends?
Well, I mean, this is a first in many, many years, perhaps the first, it's a precedent. We all believed that our foreign colleagues would be able to continue with all the difficulties of access to sources, but still being there on the ground obviously is so very important. And people like Evan, courageous, clever, knowledgeable, with his great Russian, legacy Russian, and his love of the country, and being a bridge, that sort of thing always inspired me, for example. And I just happened not to know him personally, which I think is an accident, because we're in the same circle and I know most of his friends. And I know quite a few people who are devastated by this. So yeah, that's been very emotional. No one really expected that, although there has been a long conversation about the Kremlin obviously basically using foreigners as some kind of exchange fund. This is essentially hostage taking as statecraft, which I've been saying myself for a while. But these people are courageous, and there are lots of people still there, women and men, and working on the ground. So it's we are in a process. Things are still in decline in that sense.
Maxim, is the jailing and the terror basically inflicted on Evan, is it a sign of Putin's strength or weakness? In other words, he has the power to do that, but is there a sense of fear that the regime will not tolerate any kinds of independent reporting? So is it a sense of strength or weakness on Putin's part?
Well, I think it's both. He understands. He apparently feels cornered, and apparently he feels that he needs to. He is at war. He has long been at war, long before anyone else has been at war. He has this ability to create self-fulfilling processes, self-fulfilling prophecies, because he says that, the US or the West are worst enemy, and ends up having the West as his worst enemy in the end. He says that all foreigners are evil, and he then nominates people as evil. He starts with so-called foreign agents, and so he creates these phenomena because he believes in them. This is a kind of a particular type of politician. He's not, but he's not the only one. It's a type. He's perhaps it's a matter of degree. He is quite exceptional in what he does. But there are lots of people, not just in autocracies, but even in democracies. We all know, the names of some very famous populists. So he is of this kind of breed of people. But because he's running Russia and because he has this security apparatus that is completely under his control, so he does it because he can.
Chris, in the worst of the Stalin years, there were foreign correspondents in Russia. In World War II, in Nazi Germany, there was some correspondents who were able to get the news out. Where are we supposed to turn to find out about what's going on in Russia? What do you see coming in the next few months for what's going on inside Russia right now?
Well, I think they're obviously less concerned about what we read and obviously much more concerned about what Russians read about what's going on. And that's why powerfully independent and thoughtful news organizations like Medusa, Novaya Gazeta, and so many others have been booted out. This is all about controlling the narrative. Whoever controls the narrative gets to, in some ways, control the war and control how people think about it. One of the, I do think it's surprising in the extent to which the Kremlin has been able to almost unilaterally control what they're saying and how Russians are seeing this war. And we do see a very large degree, I think, of conformity within Russian society on this. And I think when you mentioned at the beginning, I've been to Ukraine a bunch. I think one of the huge disappointments for Ukrainians, I think initially, although there was a lot of skepticism, there was still some hope that maybe the internet and some other aspects might lead more Russians to oppose this war in some way. But we've not seen that. We there may be unhappiness with the war, but there certainly hasn't been a great deal of opposition, and a lot of that has been because state TV is very powerful, much more powerful than anything that we have in the West, and it's louder. The voices scream at you. It's harder for Russians to turn out, and the little voices, always the little voices of independent media, were light, and now they're silenced altogether. So I think for me, that's what the impact is of crushing the media. I mean, we have other ways of getting stuff. We can comb through Telegram, comb through various sites in the West. We have lots of knowledgeable people. We could even write emails and call people and do WhatsApps. But it's really Russians that are have lost here.
Well, one of the ways Russians can get independent news is from the handful of brave journalists, of course, who have fled Russia and from various places in Europe continue to broadcast. We think we have solved the technical problems. So take a listen to my talk with Ekaterina, who works for Rain TV, and she'll talk about the work she's been doing to try to penetrate that wall of silence inside Russia. Ekaterina, thank you so much for joining us. I know you're really busy. Thanks for squeezing us in. Look, I know it's been a year since I last talked with you for the CFE forum. How difficult, how challenging has this year been for you and your team at Rain TV?
Well, thank you, first of all, Julian. I'm sorry. Yes, so thank you, Julian, first of all, for the invitation. I'm happy to be with you. It was difficult, obviously, because we can see that our country is still there, and there are people who can be there and who can walk through the streets and live their lives, but we are banned from the country without any any reasons for that. So during this year, we have acknowledged that obviously the better future is coming, but not very soon, as I can understand right now from this position. Maybe I was too naive in the beginning of the war, but obviously the situation is very complicated. In my personal life, there was a change. I was officially dedicated as a foreign agent by Russian Ministry of Justice. My colleagues, several colleagues, the reporters and journalists of TV Rain were also dedicated as foreign agents. But the really important thing is that we can see that there is a rise in figures in terms of audience in Russia.
Really?
So we have approximately, it changes sometimes, but more or less, approximately 20 million unique viewers on YouTube monthly, and 70% of this people are in Russia.
Wow.
So we know that there are 70%, millions of people who are still there in Russian Federation, and they watch us, and they need us, and they communicate with us. They, text us. They comment a lot. They send us messages and emails. So it is really important to them. So we became kind of a bridge between people who are still there in Russia and people who left, and who use TV Rain, and we are happy to be this bridge. They use TV Rain for communication between each other.
Wow. I know you had established yourself in Riga, in Latvia, where you are now. You ran into troubles with the Latvian government, no surprise, and you're going to be moving to Amsterdam. What kind of stories have you been doing, and what kind of stories do you plan to do to try to draw that audience and keep the numbers up, the people who clearly are thirsty for this in Russia?
Yeah, obviously we can do better. We can see that there is a really big need of information, but unfortunately, this figure, this 20 million, sometimes it changes, it becomes bigger, but not dramatically. The only incident, the precedent, I would say, that we witnessed during this year was in the end of September 2022, when Vladimir Putin declared the mobilization, and when 8 million new viewers came to TV Rain. It's a huge amount of people, 8 million new viewers. So we assume that these people watch Russian propaganda every day. But when the war came to their own homes, when the war became a problem for themselves, they have decided to go to the real journalists to understand what was the prospect for themselves. So at that moment, that critical moment, they decided to switch off a television and to turn on YouTube and watch TV Rain. This is symptomatic. So we think that what we can do is to, try to keep on looking for this language, which may be better understandable for Russians who are in a denial. We know that the big majority are not supporting the war, but are not against the war actively. The big majority is somewhere in the middle. They just don't want this war to be around. They want to live their normal lives, which is insane in the circumstances. But let's face it, this is the reality. So what we can do is trying to find the way to reach these people. And we do, step by step, we do reach them. We can see how the, figures are increasing just a little bit, step by step. It's a really hard process and complicated. But there was a big conversation in an editorial room about what we should do to find this new people, to find this new audience, and maybe we should do entertainment on air. But it's impossible to do entertainment. I said, no way. I cannot sing or dance or talk about zoo or whatever, because people are being killed right now in Ukraine. So that's why we do talk about the situation on the battlefield, every single day, and I'm going to do that in 45 minutes. We do stories about people who live at the border on Russian territory, on the border with Ukraine, and do not understand, sometimes some of them do not understand what is going on and why the shells and bombs are coming to their regions. We talk about the political activists and repressions inside Russia. We do a lot, and we have this opportunity because there are a lot of anonymous journalists who want to cooperate with TV Rain on the ground in Russia, and who send us anonymously video materials that we can use. So this is the new reality that we face, but we accept this challenge.
Personally, on a personal level, you were a vibrant journalist living in a country that you loved, and I know as journalists we live and breathe off the oxygen of the people around us. How hard has it been personally for you to be a journalist in exile from the country that you so love and care about?
Well, it's not easy, honestly, because every time you see videos from Moscow, videos of the places you used to be, and the streets, and some details that you know perfectly well, your heart breaks, and I cry a lot. We all do, and everyone here in my newsroom wants to be back. But again, honestly, Julian, our drama is a very small thing if you compare it with the drama of Ukrainians. And publicly, I prefer not to talk about the problems that we've been through because it's ridiculous.
Compared to the suffering that's going on
compared to the suffering, yes. And the most terrible thing is that Vladimir Putin has been killing people in Ukraine with my name too. I mean, in my name too. I am a citizen of Russian Federation. He says that everyone supports this so-called special military operation. I want to be someone who cries out loud that we are against, and there are millions of Russians who are against. And we have so many people every day on air who talk about their attitude, even people who are still in Russia. And it's funny to say, funny, of course, so-called funny fact is that every time someone new comes on air, new experts, I don't know, political analysts, journalists who dare to talk on air openly, they immediately got problems from the government of Russian Federation. They have some kind of letters from different departments of different organizations. And I mean, it's always a problem, but people still decide, a lot of people still decide to talk to us. And this is amazing. It gives me hope.
Speaking of problems, and let's end it here because I know you have to rush off and do your important newscast. You met Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal reporter, a couple of months ago, just before he returned to get arrested. What was it like meeting him, and what's your fear about what his arrest means for news coming out of Putin's Russia?
Well, we met in Riga when Ivan was preparing a piece about TV Rain's faith, I would say. And I mean, he was a person that is a very well-known journalist in Moscow. Everyone knows Evan. And well, he's a great friend for a lot of Russian journalists. And, the whole community is astonished with what's going on with him. And we had this, I remember this envy that I felt when Evan recorded the interviews with my colleagues and then said, bye guys, and went back to Moscow. This is something that we couldn't do. And we all thought, and I thought that, my God, what a lucky person. There was a common knowledge in Russia that we Russian journalists were under the threat all the time, and we were forced to flee the country. But the foreign journalists were safe. I mean, everyone knew that. if you work for Wall Street Journal, if you work for CNN or BBC or The Guardian or Economist, you are safe. Now, this is the different situation. We understand that first thing is that Vladimir Putin will try to exchange Evan for someone. And we hope this will happen. And I really hope that this is the main idea of this terrible decision. And the second thing is that he's showing, Russian government and president of Russia are showing to Western journalists that are doing great job in Russia, by the way, and Ukraine. So they're showing them that there is no room for them anymore, that they are not happy with this reporting and they want Western journalists to leave. So I have heard already some stories about, very solid media outlets that have decided to stop cooperating, stop working in Russia, and they have decided to leave.
Well, then all the more important for the work that you're doing. Look, I know you have a newscast coming up. It's important that you...
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, it's important that you broadcast the truth to your audience in Russia and around the world. So best of luck and stay safe, and we'll keep in touch, Ekaterina. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So that was my interview earlier this morning with Ekaterina. She's now broadcasting live. They broadcast on YouTube to a very strong Russian audience and an audience around the world. Maxim and Chris, listening to Ekaterina, you get a real sense of the challenges and the and also the despair of this huge number of expat journalists. Maxim, you work with Meduza, one of the leading expat media. What impact do you think the work that you and Ekaterina and other Russian journalists outside of Russia are having inside Putin's Russia? Are you able to penetrate that wall?
Well, to a certain degree, yes. But our understanding is that the kind of audience that we can reach is limited and it's not growing. The reasons are unknown, really. And it's a matter of, it's probably somebody needs to study that. But what we see is that there is this certain circle of people, roughly, I mean, Ekaterina mentioned about 20 million, 17, 20 million, up to 25 sometimes, but that's where we are. I mean, it's not tiny, but it's the kind of part of a Russian society that is able to distinguish between, quality of reporting, quality of thinking, different kinds of media. Perhaps others just don't care. And I mean, if you think about any society, you'd probably realize that there's always a group of people who, have a certain kind of diverse media diet, and a group of people, probably perhaps very often larger group that prefers to sit in their silos and their echo chambers. And Russia is no different. Russia is just this very normal place in a way, where people do the same things they do almost anywhere. People sit in their echo chambers, except that the situation is exceptional, and the country's leadership is waging a war of aggression, a barbaric and criminal war. And I would just say, I don't know how to expand the audience. I wish I could, but at this point, we are where we are, and it's good that we keep that. The thing is that, you see, it's a mechanism. It's how people understand information, how people perceive things. It's if you remember the king is naked, this sort of thing. Most of the Russians, including those who live in Russia, understand what's going on. At least they know what's going on. There's no question that we could suddenly, open some gates and the flood of new knowledge will come crashing on their heads. They probably don't know the details, but they do realize what's going on. They realize that it's a war of aggression. They realize the atrocities. They see the buildings coming down. Most of them understand that the rockets are Russian rockets, despite whatever is the television talking heads are saying, that the Ukrainians are blowing up their own houses. People are not stupid. The thing is that they all behave the way these crowds around the king behave, because they see the naked king. But there's no the kid who says this. The guy is naked. He does not bring in any new information. Everybody knows that he's naked. But the way human perception works is that when we see when we work with the facts, with the phenomena of the world, we start with our own bias, with our thinking about things, rather than we're not machines, rather than just taking facts at their own value. I mean, being Canadian, you're probably in a better situation, but your neighbors to the south, I mean, they live in a society that is completely polarized, being at the same time very free. The information is everywhere, and then you have some parts of society and the other parts of society that don't even share any facts.
Interesting.
And so that's the same. I mean, this is the phenomenon of the same. It's similar, except that the Russian-Ukrainian, Russo-Ukrainian war is just probably the worst that's happened in the 21st century. So
I find it interesting that, to your point, Maxim, where Ekaterina talked about when the war came closer to Russians with conscription, with the draft, not conscription, their numbers shot up by 8 million, because suddenly the war meant something to families all through Russia. And then it began to drop off again as the war seemed.
No, yes, they know where to go. They know where to go.
They know where the truth is. They just might not be regular viewers of RAIN. Chris, to what extent, because you've been to Ukraine more than any of us recently, to what extent are Ukrainians aware or even care about the fact that there are the Maxims and the Ekaterinas, Russians who are opposed to the war, and in many ways risking their lives to getting the news out? What's your sense inside the Ukraine about how they see that?
My sense initially was that Ukrainians had some hope that there might be some pushback. I don't think anyone was under any illusion that sort of was going to happen in a very large way. But I do think as the months have gone by, the disappointment became quite evident that there wasn't more resistance within Russia, that the narratives were simply lapped up. And I think now even the likes of Alexei Navalny, which many people would see as, his resistance has been quite, I'll use the word heroic even, sort of sacrificing himself to go in jail. Even someone like Navalny is quite a divisive figure in Ukraine, because he didn't initially oppose the takeover of Crimea. So for a lot of Ukrainians, this has been a bit of a litmus test. And I think they found, even many Russian liberals quite wanting. So I don't think, unfortunately, they've kind of tarred everyone with the same brush. I wish it wasn't the case, but I would say from what I've seen and heard that it is.
Wow. Well, I don't want to necessarily end on a dark or sad note, but things are bleak. People continue to die, and frankly, press freedom continues to die. So in the final section, I'd like to ask both of you, as I asked Ekaterina, where do we go from here? A year ago, the war was still new, it was fresh. There was hope, as Chris explained, about some kind of change. But now we're headed into an even darker period. It's hard to keep the Western public's attention. Let me start with you, Maxim. how do you keep your spirits up, and how difficult is it not to be dragged into a kind of darkness when you're trying to write your opinion columns and bring fresh ideas to the table?
Well, first of all, it is hard, and there's a lot of pressure, and it's. I mean, I will start with what Chris said. I mean, I just said I am aware of what most Ukrainians, of the kind of environment, the thinking that most Ukrainians have about us, you know, passport carrying Russians. I am one of them. And despite anything, we've failed, and I understand that. Despite everything we've been trying to do for the past, in my case, about 20 years, trying to create a free environment within the deteriorating kind of statist, state-controlled system. We've understood since early 2000s. It was pretty obvious. You needn't be a super analyst to get the idea. The things were going slowly down, but still, I mean, it's hard to live with this understanding that it will always go down. You have to believe, or at least you have to work and hope for the best. And so in a way it continues, in a sense that even in this darkness, I am, well, personally, I would just speak for myself. What I am looking for ways of becoming less Russia-centric. That's one thing I've realized at some point, not last year, but some years before, that Russia being a big country, the Russian culture being a big culture, it kind of creates a certain comfort zone for you. Growing, with the likes of Tolstoy and Tchaikovsky and things like that. The Russian novel, the Russian music, Nabokov. So there are lots of redeeming names for you to keep and say that I am not part of this. I am not part of this state. The Kremlin is foreign to me, but Nabokov is not, or Tchaikovsky. So it creates a certain comfort zone, and you continue to, and it kind of allows you to continue looking at the world from sort of Moscow, kind of from the center of. I'm from Moscow myself, so it's my hometown. So and this is something I've been working on for the past years. Try to shift the perspective, to realize that the Russian history is not the only history. Russia is part of certain things. Russia is never been really the center of the world, etc., etc. So stop just studying endlessly Russian society. Put it in perspective. Realize that there are other phenomena in the world that Russia is just an element of. So these kind of things that I've been trying to work on, to be less, in a way, less Russian in a way.
Chris, based on what Maxim said, you've been in and out of the Ukraine, but the world's attention can be fickle. The last few days, your hands have been full with Sudan. We have the American elections coming up, all kinds of other issues that can grab people's attention. How do you, as a foreign correspondent, see the challenges of covering Ukraine in the next few months to come?
My read on how our stories have been received over the last year has been that people generally appreciate that Canadian media, and not just CBC, but all of them, have been there for the longest time. The last year, we've rotated crews, spending about a month or so at a time, and really traveling everywhere, right to the front lines and all over Ukraine. And the stories have been lapped up, I would say, and that has given me, that's made me feel proud to be a part of this exercise. But it's very expensive, it's very dangerous, it's difficult, and it's not sustainable forever. And already we're scaling back. So I suspect, like everyone else, we're going to watch and wait and see what happens this spring, this summer. We'll see what comes out of a Ukrainian counteroffensive, and we'll see how the Russians respond, and we'll go from there. This story, will have to end at some point. We don't have budgets that are, go on forever and ever either. So next step, let's see what happens this spring, and we'll go from there.
All right. We've have a few questions already from the audience based on Ekaterina and Chris and Maxim's thoughts. And I encourage our viewers and listeners to send questions through the app if you have any questions. I'm going to ask Ange to give us the first question, and any one of you can answer. Ange?
The first question is directed towards Maxim, but I would imagine anybody can answer. It's from David, and David says, Maxim, and I'm amazed when I hear people like Noam Chomsky take what I feel is basically a blame NATO, not Putin position. I hear this from some of the left, be it from writers in The Nation magazine, etc. What is your analysis of this, and what do you feel is the best way to answer? I know that some Ukrainian intellectuals on the left have done precisely that.
Well,
Can you quickly repeat the question in the sense that
let me just
what Chomsky's what kind of Chomsky's position?
What I think what the question is about is that there is a political position among some left-wing people in America and elsewhere who are used to opposing NATO and continue to oppose NATO, and are put much more blame on NATO and are hesitant in many ways to be seen as being pro-Ukraine. How do you answer?
Yeah, I understand that. So this is a big issue. I won't be able to answer it in 2 minutes. In 2 minutes, but very quickly, all of these views, if you take John Mearsheimer or Noam Chomsky, they basically forget that country. So they look at the world as if from a bird's view. There are big nations. There are great power politics, and but countries like Ukraine, countries like Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, they do have agency, and you cannot just simply deprive them of agency. And even if we go back to facts, this whole point of this whole talk of Gorbachev being promised this whole thing of not an inch east, this is simply not true. The documents have been published already. You can check that. It's not hard. Or you can check the book by Mary Surratt that is called exactly that, not an inch, or not an inch east. But everything's published. There was no promise. And the entire conversation, it was just a conversation between Mikhail Gorbachev and James Baker, the Secretary of State of the United States at the time. So this is a kind of half-invented narrative. And again, agency. Small places like Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, they still do have agency. They have a history with Russia. You simply cannot just say, you guys sit tight and we're going to do some kind of big thing with Moscow. This is wrong. You cannot just do Washington-Moscow thing. And this is exactly what they're saying.
All right. Thanks, Maxim. Ange, next question.
Yeah, the next question is from Robin. And Robin asks, is it correct to assume that the situation of journalists in Russia will not change until the Russian war on Ukraine is ended? If so, how can an end to the war be achieved, given there seem to be decreasing openness to compromise on both sides as the war goes on?
Chris, you want to take a crack at that?
I don't think that the situation for journalists in Russia is going to change until the Kremlin changes its position, and I don't see the Kremlin changing its position until there's a new Russian leader. And you know, it's I said earlier, this is about controlling the narrative, and it's no secret that when Vladimir Putin, you know, came back into power after being president, after being prime minister, he really cracked down on Russian media. That was their first target. And you know, because he knows the value of people like Maxim and people like Ekaterina and others to influence minds and thoughts. And so it's going to be a grim time. And I hope you know, again, people like Maxim outlast Mr. Putin, because there's a big role for them at some point in Russia, but I don't know when it is.
Chris, if I get what you're saying and what you said earlier as well, is that despite the courage and tenacity of people like Maxim and Ekaterina, unless the situation changes on the ground, we're at a stalemate in the war. As you said, let's see what happens with the spring offensive. But if things kind of drag on the way they are, there isn't going to be that breakthrough, right, inside Russia. We need a significant shift on the battlefield for the political and journalistic battlefield to change. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, you know, I don't see much hope on this day. Maybe I'll wake up in the morning and feel a little better about it, but I don't see it, because the future of journalism and the future of the war and the future of Putin, they're all linked, and they're tightly linked. And you know, until the guy at the top has a change, you know, Russia is going to continue down this heavy authoritarian, arguably, you know, totalitarian way. I mean, the number of people getting thrown in jail now for treason, which is, you know, a terrible crime, a terrible allegation for opposing the war. That's where we're at. I mean, the number of cases since 2022, since this invasion, it's gone way up, because the government is using everything they can to stifle opposition, stifle dissent, and to you know, stop people who have other ideas.
I believe the number is something like 20 or 25,000 people so far have been charged specifically with treason under the new law. And next question.
Yeah, the next question is from Lewis. Are there ways we in the West can express support for independent Russian journalists?
Send money. Maxim, you can answer that as an independent Russian journalist. How can people watching this, people in Canada, around the world, how can they support your efforts and the efforts of other independent Russian journalists?
Well, read, repost. I mean, we do have, I mean, at this point, despite this situation being dark and for us as professionals quite depressing, we are operating. And I personally, for example, just talking about myself because I know the situation, so I am still able to write for a major Russian language outlet that is called Medusa, that is reaching millions of people in Russia. It's perhaps, I mean, if we're talking about text things, this is perhaps the biggest. And it actually has an English language version, which is smaller than the Russian one, but it would, you know, gives you an idea of what we are doing. So you can check that out and you know, see for yourself what is this. And I think what always helps is to get across. Of course, it's our job to get across messages across to the Russians back at home, but it also helps for us to try and break through to Western audiences, because I think, I personally, again speaking for myself without trying to impose anything on my colleagues, but I do like to think about people like myself as a kind of bridge. We we understand what's going on back in Russia, and it sometimes makes sense to try and carry that message to the West, to the Western audiences, maybe to politicians, so that they understand the situation better. So just help that it's not about donating anything, or it's just trying to again, talking about echo chambers and silence, going out of that a little bit and see how people from this strange place called Russia think. It actually applies to anything. It applies to how the Chinese, particularly if they're free Chinese, think, what the Indians, etc., etc.
Thanks. That's helpful, I think. And I think we should realize the privileged position we're in and benefit from that, from reading the stuff
Totally.
that Maxim and Ekaterina are writing. A lot of it is available in English, and retweeting it and putting it out on social media. Ange, any more questions?
Yeah, the next question is from Carol. If Ukrainians are increasingly tarring all Russians with the same brush, both democratic anti-Putin Russians and those who support Putin, how can there be a resolution of the war?
Chris, you talked about that, so pick up on that.
Well, I think, not wanting to speak for all Ukrainians, but I think the resolution to the war is for Russia to pull its army out of Ukraine. I think that's largely what they would say. It's not the, this was an invasion. This was an illegal attempt to redefine the boundaries of another country by Russia. It is the Russian army and the Russian elite, the political class, that are driving this. And so that, I think, is the solution. It's unfortunate that there are well-meaning liberal Russians that are getting caught up in this maelstrom and are having their lives ruined by it as well. But as Maxim and Ekaterina and others have said, it is the Ukrainians that are paying extremely the heaviest price you can imagine for it. While I personally see the nuance, I can understand why they don't.
Thanks. Ange, next question.
The next question is from Carolyn. Carolyn asks, what difference might it make, if any, if there were regime change, if someone like Navalny was in control?
Any of you guys want to answer that? I mean, it would make all the difference in the world. Maxim?
Well, it would make a lot of difference. Obviously, there would be no war. That is for sure, because the entire premise, the message Alexei has always been trying to get across is that he focuses on the nation itself, on its development, on the Russians' well-being, and none of that involves waging a war against anyone. So Russia, there's been a long kind of clash within Russian society of those who are older and those who still think in terms of an empire, the former Soviet empire, who thinks that the country's strength is measured in the number of allies, if you will, or the kind of influence you have on the world. And this growing, perhaps majority of those Russians who were born later or educated in a different way, who were completely, who wouldn't even understand that discourse. It's just a different thing. You have this country, you want your life, you want to educate your children, you want to, take care about your environment and everything else. So just being normal. So Russia has been divided, and the part of Russian society that would believe in a normal Russia, in the sense that it is in a non-aggressive country. It's a country that stopped being an empire and just started taking care about itself and its life. This part of Russian society has been growing steadily, and Putin and the company, they realized that, and they saw that as a threat. These guys are not just, they're war criminals, and they are aggressors, but they're also evil in that sense. They realize that their time is they're going away. They're all in their 70s, for God's sake. Look at them. They were born in the early 50s. Some of them in the late 40s. They're in the 70s. They were growing up in the 1970s as a depressed, disillusioned, late Soviet people, part of the system, not dissidents. So these are the kind of specific kind of people, and they realize that they're losing, that the time is ending, and that's a really evil, dark attempt at stopping the time and prolonging their life, including physically, because this system kind of presupposes that Putin lives forever. By the way, they don't have any succession mechanism or anything. So these people are truly evil. It's hard to stop them at this point because they're in agony, whether they realize this or not. We may argue about that, but this is the situation.
Chris, is it fair to say that as you've kind of indicated, that the fate of Putin and the war are inextricably linked? The war will only end if Putin is no longer in power, but also one of the only certain ways that Putin may be dislodged from power is if the war turns terribly bad for Russia and the war kind of hits home. Is that accurate?
Well, one hope, one hope, if the war goes bad, this one thing is not enough, because he can always sell to his audiences that this was a victory of some kind. But what's important is also that the state weakens. This apparatus weakens, and we still have some hope for that, because sanctions are working to an extent. The standard of living is going down. People do realize that they don't have this, don't have that, and this is starting to bite. Also, the mobilization thing they've just done is quite a sea change, because what they've created a new law, essentially, making the summons for military service effective the way the state official presses the button. You don't need to carry it to this person and give it to them personally. You just press the button and people get it on their electronic system, the system that Russia has there. And so basically, and if you refuse to go and present yourself at the enlistment bureau, you essentially lose a lot of rights immediately, including, for example, the right to drive a car. And it's just happened a week ago. The right to deal with a bank, sell or buy real estate. So this is pretty tough. And I'm not sure everyone in this, and it concerns tens of millions of people. And we will see potentially, this is a bombshell. This should be, but the propaganda is so careful. They're trying to play this down, but it's not. It's like they've essentially introduced a Chinese type of surveillance state as a matter of one law, and they will continue. So now we have a window because they don't have everything in place, but the law is already there, and potentially all those people. They lose a lot of rights. Sometimes they lose an ability to earn a living, and obviously they lose an ability to travel, move about, and leave Russia potentially if they refuse to go and join the military. So this is a big story. Actually, we will see how it plays out.
We're almost out of time, and also Chris, being a busy journalist, has to file for tonight's news, no doubt on Sudan or some other hotspot. Chris, let's end with a brief thought from you on a personal level. You're likely going to be going back to Ukraine sometime in the near future. How do you keep your hope up that your reporting will make a difference to the people in Ukraine and to the audience that's watching you in Canada and around the world? You know, what drives you? What keeps you going? We heard from Ekaterina and Maxim, but what about for you?
Look, I've been out many times in Ukraine where we've interviewed Ukrainians, even people who've come up to us in the street in Kyiv when they hear us speaking English, and they've come and they've said, thank you for being here. Thank you for telling our story. This is unusual. It doesn't happen here in London, and it doesn't happen very much in Canada. You know, these are just small things, but I can tell you, you know, when we deal with the government in Ukraine, you know, in general, we have very good access. We're obviously there and facilitated because Canada, for example, in our case, has something that they want. But I think also beyond, you know, we're seeing a country that as Russia becomes more authoritarian, more totalitarian, Ukraine's going the other way, and that's fascinating to watch. It's fascinating to see. So I'm, you know, it is difficult work, and we will be going back. But I can't think of a more important story to cover right now.
Well, on that optimistic note, I want to end on that, on the braveness of people like Chris, Maxim, and Ekaterina. And over to you, Jim, for a sign off.
Well, I want to thank Chris and Maxime and Ekaterina in absentia for participating today, and Julian for a wonderful job you did in moderating this panel. I'd like the audience to know that tomorrow a video of this panel will be posted on the CFE website so that others who weren't able to join us this afternoon can see it. But we'll also be posting some information about other resources that you may find interesting if you're taken in by issues raised today. But we'll also be posting links to independent Russian media that's available in English so that you'll be able to follow that up. And we'll also provide links for any of you who would like to send support for independent journalists that we've been talking about today. So those will be on the CFE website, and the URL for that is cfe.torontomu.ca, cfe.torontomu.ca. Our next event will be on Wednesday, May 3rd, in a couple of weeks. And we're going to be turning our attention to China, but in a different, not with respect to journalists, but with regard to academics. Academics, whether in China or outside of China, who study China, are facing increasing challenges and pressure from the Chinese government and from diaspora groups related to the Chinese government. So the panel will be a continuation of our panel that's been looking at ethnic religious nationalism and academic freedom. We looked at it with regard to Palestine and Israel. We've looked at it with regard to India. Now we're going to look at the challenges faced by scholars of China. So that'll be on Wednesday, May 3rd at 4 p.m. And encourage you to have a look at that. If you want to see what other events we have coming up, again, they're on our website, cfe.torontomu.ca. Click on events and you'll see both the upcoming events and past events. So thank you very much for joining us today. And again, thank you to the panel for such an engaging discussion. Bye-bye, everyone.